Okay, um, it's time to have a discussion on our political parties, because that's not after this recent election. I was looking at the Sunday shows, well, one in particular, and Rahm Emanuel was on, and I don't care whether, you think, I don't know if anybody thinks that he's a particularly reasonable place to look at, but, um, you know, very much establishment Democrat, fairly liberal, but, not on the extreme left side of things, more probably not that liberal centrist, on more the Obama wing, but more liberal than, say, Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton for that matter. And that shows you where I see my center, the center. I know some people see it as, oh my God, the whole country's gone completely liberal. Well, I see it more the other way. And I can see why there's that division, but we'll get to that in a bit, I think. But what he brought up was that both parties, and I think this was a very clever observation, both parties are essentially being driven, not necessarily in their majority, in fact, definitely not in their majority in the case of the Democrats, by their more radical wing. It's harder to tell with the Republicans, but the fact that, more centrist candidates were getting more of the vote than the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing, and that the party circled around Joe Biden to make sure, and some of that's a political calculation. Even people who may be desiring a more liberal position may have said, no, this is too important. We have to make sure that we get the current president out of the White House. On the other hand, if you look at the Republican Party, the fact that Trump has such high support ratings indicates something that needs to be investigated. In terms of a soul-searching type of thing, not a criminal investigation. Those are something separate. So, what Emmanuel basically said was that each party has this very, very active, very, very mobilizing base that has shifted further and further towards the more radical side. And it's kind of odd because on the Democratic side, the radical side seems like the kind of Democratic radicals that we're used to. This sort of populist, opposed to the police power of the state being used, opposed to war, get more money into the common man's hands and stop giving corporate welfare, etc. And by the way, at the same time as I've been doing this, I finally got around to reading Matt Taibbi's The Great Divide, and I'm a little ways into it. But, I'm aware of all this shit already. It was very interesting to see Emmanuel put it down very clearly, that each of the parties has a faction that's very, very active, that is anti-establishment, that has decided, you know what, this country ain't working for us anymore, right? And that's kind of the interesting thing here, because I've been looking at, hey, is there room for a third party in the middle ground? And there kind of is, because we've basically broken into three separate positions. And there's three very distinct positions. Now, each of them has its gradations, right? But anyway, what's kind of odd from the Republican side is that kind of Republican populism, sure, it's existed on the social issues, to a large extent, and that's been some and the evangelical vote that's existed for a long time as this sort of wing of the Republican Party that was good for votes as long as you placated them, the same way the Democrats placated their more liberal side socially with, well, maybe it's not time for gay marriage yet, but we should, stop uh, stop discriminating against them in the workplace, which of course many states don't have laws that allow for that anyway, although gay marriage is now, the law of the land. It's easier to get your civil rights around some kind of outdated Bronze Age religious ceremony that somehow the state has its fingers in than it is to get it around basic things like, should you be allowed to hold a job because of who you are? What? Okay. So one of the things that I kept looking at, though, was, gee, what happens if there was a party that sort of formed, and I don't think it can form as a real third party. It can't form from the grassroots up. And I mentioned this on Facebook. What you'd have to have is really something like, and you kind of started seeing this really like the day after I wrote the post, even though this has been kind of formulating in everybody's head for months and months, it was like, look, there's sort of this basic institutional wing of our government. There are a lot of people, especially in the Senate, but even in the House, who are like, yeah, America has worked so far. It's worked pretty well. Let's not rock the boat too much, Let's not destroy the republic over the matter of Donald Trump, as an example, which this, post-election process seems to have been trying to do, and may still, for all we know. Well, the problem with that is there is not a real grassroots activist support for it. This status quo is the people who are doing fine. People like me, for the most part, although I have my problems. Everybody has their problems, but I have my problems that are directly impacted by the way the government interacts with the world and the way the world works in some ways. So, I don't think that I can see my fix coming out of this in any way, in any shape. But there are some things that would help me, I would very much like to be in a healthcare system where I don't have to try to look up and figure out whether, what doctor I can go to get my best payoff, and whether or not I should go to a doctor for preventative stuff or take my risks. Indeed, I feel like my healthcare should be saying, you know what, you don't go to a doctor, that's a problem, go. We'll set it up for you if you don't set it up. And, we'll pay to get you there if you can't get to the place that we picked you. All kind of stuff like that. I need a nanny state, I really do, but that's just me. And that's not something I expect to come out of America in any sense. But I do think that, some aspects of that should be possible. Like, I should be able to go to a doctor when I have something wrong without trying to figure out, well, how much is this going to cost me out of my deductible? Do I care? Because I already have enough disincentives to going to the doctor as it stands. And obviously I could be paying for a better insurance, but and with the vaccine, how are they going to deliver that? If that's not more or less everyone can just walk in and get it, you think I'm going to get it? I have some misgivings already. If I have to walk and get it, I'm already putting some effort in towards something I'm not sure I'd want, and I will probably put off for like a year or so at least. you know, and again, if you don't make things very, very easy to do, there's going to be a large percentage of people who just, yeah, it's not worth the bother. You know, at least that's my assumption on most things. Maybe not with the vaccine. Maybe people are so terrified. Um, but I would suspect there's enough people who are kind of on the line who would shift if it was made easy to get. I haven't been able to get a test. Why? I have to call a doctor and go, you know, and I tried it through telemedicine or whatever. It didn't work. Anyway, see how they ramble? I even wrote damn notes and I can't help myself. My brain just leaps around too much to focus on anything. So, the thing is, the side that has the most invested in America is the status quo faction. And I don't think I said it. Probably Rahm Emanuel fits into it well enough. Your James Carville, your Chris Christie. But you're probably most exemplified looking at like a Hillary Clinton, a Mitt Romney, these people who've risen to the top of their party as that selection. Not someone anybody's all that excited about, but you know they're not going to break things, right? And you have a fair portion of that establishment wing of the parties that's afraid. Now, in the Democratic side, you have I think it's had a certain strength to it that prevented even though people say, hey, oh no, Joe Biden is going to be elected and he's going to be a puppet of the left, of Kamala Harris. What the fuck? I mean, she's part of the centrist wing too, folks. I mean, she's got serious problems on that side. Maybe more than Biden does in some ways. You get the feeling Joe Biden's, well, you get the feeling they're both kind of wishy-washy, but, and go with the flow of where the majority of the party goes. But there's been this consistent sort of tendency to avoid going to the radical side, in part because, hey, they're centrist voters. We got to capture the undecided centrist side. Well, the undecided side may not be all on the centrist side anymore. And here's why. Because the way the status quo has been for the past 40 years, and I'm not saying it was perfect during the 70s either. That was a different problem. Has been shifting towards, again and again, corporate welfare, supporting the building of wealth at the highest end, and you definitely see that. And regardless of how much the centrist Democrats mock trickle-down economics, they have been practicing it. This is what the neoliberals have been doing, basically. They took on the whole concept of Reaganism, mocked it, made fun of it because that wins them votes, but then adopted many of the policies with the hopes that, you know, hey, more innovation in industry, more freedom to make different financial arrangements, etc. The better the stock market. This is all going to work out to be better productivity and better wages for the worker, or better security at least. Well, it sort of worked. If you look throughout the period, other than some deregulation issues, so it was deregulation that has caused, on a regular basis, that has caused the real calamities. It's a failure of government to be proactive enough. What government is good at is gumming up the works enough that in many cases horrible things don't happen. So the 2008 crisis, well, you can point to certain laws that were repealed that allowed banks to become too big to fail, investment banks to be aligned and under the same corporate structure as the regular banking industry. Just a number of various things, a reduction in the prosecutional power and willingness to make examples of of malfeasance in industry. Just this overall weakening of the regulatory side and the restrictions that, yes, they do dampen the capability to create this sort of fake wealth, right? I mean, electronic money, whatever it is, and that's all we have now, basically. Sure, we have paper money, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. All that really matters is how much money the government is printing, how much it's claiming that it's taking on in debt, and how much money the banks are allowed to take on and create in debt. Don't think it's all in the government's hands, although the government regulates the banking industry, so. But whatever you want to look at, you can see the effects, the impact. The wealthy have gotten wealthier and wealthier. The poor have gotten poorer in terms of real dollars. The actual wages have been depressed. Productivity has gone up. The cost of labor has gone down. Now, if labor was maybe 20% of the population, that would be a terrible shame, wouldn't it? You know, if it was just the McDonald's workers who were getting hurt by this. Well, that's horrible. But more and more of our labor force is in service industries, is in even in the manufacturing and fulfillment and everything like that. Those wages are getting held down as automation is taking greater effect. Any decent jobs are becoming reduced less and less. The power of labor to be able to enforce its will on business and force a higher wage, well, that's been reduced by a couple of means. One is those automation, the reduction in the number of good jobs there are, but also there have been governmental policies to roll back the gains that labor made during the 20th century up until approximately the Reagan era, where labor started to really be crushed. Now, I'm not going to deny there were serious problems in the U.S. Economy during the 1970s. And some of them can be tied very clearly to the Great Society type principles that are in play, perhaps. More of them, though, can be tied to things like energy policy. But again, you know, Reagan reversed restrictions on energy policy, etc., which helped spur this economic engine. So it's as though there are some things that are good and some things that are bad, but it's hard to tell what, right? You know, especially when you're in the moment. It's hard to tell. And so guiding principles follow. And the guiding principles of the Democratic Party were protect the environment, help labor, that, you know, protect minorities. This is sort of their circle of issues, their bundle of issues, whereas the Republican bundle of issues was everybody gets better if, you know, the business of America is business, to go back quite a bit further than Reagan. Something that was fundamentally disproven, you know, in 1929, that unregulated wealth accumulation is a horrible, horrible problem. And even at that point, you were already seeing the move towards regulation, but then, boom. Okay. So what we have is what I'd call the confluence of the center, which is very much status quo in favor of the powerful institutions that have kept our republic um, the compromise of our republic continuing, essentially, have kept that in place. So there you have your big media interests for the most part. And this would include Fox up until 2010 or so. Fox kind of started diverting and becoming more and more attracted to this more radical side, in the same way that you would say that MSNBC is attracted to the more radical side of the Liberal Party. But that compromise included the major institutions, and there were disagreements within that compromise. There's no question. So especially among social issues, there were problems there. There were also problems in terms of, well, what corporate welfare should we favor, right? Now you hear someone like Mitt Romney say something, we don't want to pick winners and losers. Yeah, bullshit. I mean, just bullshit. Maybe he believes that deep down in his heart. Maybe some conservatives believe that in their heart, but the truth of the matter is that the center of the party, the old center of the party, was very much, or the old centrist part of the party that was part of this compromise, was very much in favor of, yeah, let's have that ethanol subsidy. Let's have the big agricultural subsidies. Let's have the pharmaceutical subsidies. Let's do these things that give the oil subsidies, etc. But the basic compromise between the left and right was similar. The idea of let's use financial incentives to get the behavior that we want from businesses. Yeah, we'll give oil more money. We'll give them tax breaks for doing drilling, right? Why? Well, there are arguments for why. We'll give them this capital depreciation for draining their wells. What? Why do we want to encourage the use of natural resources? Well, on the other side, we'll give money to the development of new technologies in terms of greener energy producing. And so you had this, general agreement as to how the government should more or less work, but a strong disagreement on individual issues of how you allocate the fruits of that government. So let's make sure corporations, businesses, etc. are free to do what they need to do to make money, versus let's make sure that the population as a whole is getting the things that we see as basic to the population, perhaps. Although that's a little dangerous, because that's where we're getting to where the problem really is. Because the Democrats stopped being sort of a liberal labor type party, if they ever really were. They never were as liberal as the labor parties in the more socialist, and socialism being, a spectrum. I don't think there's almost no one in our government who is not socialist, right? In terms of the government should be taking care of certain things at least. Military is a little weird, but fire department, policing, these things, again, you could say, well, policing is necessary to protect the state, and that's true. But protecting the citizenry is a different thing. And that we already had a discussion on this recently, but that becomes that is a socialist service that's being provided by the government to the people as a whole. Now, it's pretty minimal. When you look at the fire department, the policing, that's pretty damn minimal when you compare that to let's make sure everybody has internet. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. You know, you still have things like the Tennessee Valley Authority and stuff, and you know, no matter how this is serving some of the most conservative areas in the country, and they're getting, you know, subsidized energy from it. You know, no way in hell you could take that away from them. The states have some certain power. There's a reason that, you know, West Virginia and Kentucky are net, no matter whether they're Republican or Democrat, they're net takers of money from the government, as opposed to the states that are kind of seen as the great welfare states, which are net paying out. It kind of doesn't matter what you do in those states. It's not how they're governed that's causing this. I would guess Texas probably pays out as even during, you know, its conservative times. It's more that a richer state feels that it's capable of doing things that these poorer states can't do. But the poorer states need the federal government to do them for them. The richer states want their share of what they're paying to come back to them. At least a fairer apportionment than they're currently getting. Maybe not their whole share, because again, they're looking, you know, if you're looking at the more liberal states, they're looking at, you know, it sucks that we're paying, you know, $1.80 for every dollar we get back from the federal government, or $1.30 or whatever, and that, you know, these poorer states that are opposed to government handouts are getting, like, you know, significantly more than what they're paying in. Well, yeah, it is kind of funny though when you think about that, how much federal money goes into the states that are most against federal money going places. You know, they're like, look, make the government small, but don't touch our handout. Fucking skinflints. Yeah, and that's what you see, honestly, with this institutional side of things. You know, it's like the Koch brothers, oh, can't give out money, the Koch brother, can't give out money, you know, to people who aren't pulling their share. But oh boy, you know, give us our subsidies for extracting minerals, etc. You're kind of missing the point, you know. The question is not, is there some moral value? First of all, there's a divide, right? You know, is it good or evil to be extracting coal to begin with? But there's also the don't make moral judgments on the people that are supporting. Make economic judgments. Here's an example. The homeless. The homeless cost, and here I'm making the liberal argument, the homeless cost a certain huge amount of money simply by their existence. That amount of money is less, or is more, than providing them with the kind of resources that they need to not be homeless anymore. And where it's been tried, things like giving, at least with certain homeless groups, giving vouchers so that they can get housing, making sure that they can kind of stabilize their lives, they're not going to have a fantastic fucking life out of that. You know, it's still pretty low, but it's enough that they can actually go out and get and keep a job, right? Whereas if you're on the street corner because some bad events have taken you over, or maybe you're addicted to some drugs, you know, again, we do the same thing with the drugs. Minor drug offenders, someone who's addicted, what do? We put all these burdens in their way. They can't get a job anymore because they have to announce on their job application that they've been convicted of a drug offense, or they lie and then they get convicted. Then they get fired for lying on their sheet, or even if you can get hired after you've had this conviction, there are places that impose these burdens. You got to go in for regular drug tests, or yeah, you may not be able to have a driver's license. And I got to tell you, most people don't deserve a driver's license. You shouldn't be driving. You shouldn't be using deadly weapons regularly without a fair degree of competence being assessed regularly. I have a fucking driver's license that will last me until I'm 65 from Arizona. I can't drive with shit, okay? I really can't. I should not be trusted behind the wheel of a car, period. But our society is structured in such a way that everybody needs one. It's kind of like back in the backwoods days, well, I need my musket. Maybe I can't shoot well. Maybe I'll hit my kid. But I need it because I gotta fend off the bear and Indian. And it's a ridiculous thing to do if better can be provided, if public transport can reach everywhere, or some kind of other simpler means of getting about. And enough to carry, your groceries and whatever you need. But anyway. And we keep seeing my liberal bent and why it's there. Again and again, and that's not what I intend to do here, nor do I intend, but it's very hard for me to disassociate from that, because it impacts my life pretty heavily, and it has impacted it more, and there are people who are impacted by the bad effects of that so much more. And you kind of look at it as, well, should some person be homeless on the corner when some person owns 15 mansions? What's up with that? What do you need that many for? There's a basic fairness issue in play of the society is not providing enough. Now, is it true that a late night talk show host is providing all that much more than a street philosopher? Certainly to more people, but I don't know that it's that many degrees more. And they're certainly not working harder than someone in the coal mines, All right. So what we've been seeing in the last couple election cycles is the culmination of the 2010 insurgency on the right, with Donald Trump, who supposedly, is saying, I'll clean out the swamp, which hasn't happened. I'll challenge some of the basic assumptions that the center has had, like, hey, is free trade really a good thing if we're getting fucked? And some of those things are the same things that the insurgency that started a little earlier on the left, the Occupy movement, which fizzled out to some extent, but keeps flaring back up, that culminated in the Bernie Sanders type flavor of things. And again, there is that question. Why are we doing these wars? Why are we, intervening in all kind of other countries? Why do we have these trade deals? There's this sort of very basic, this economy that we've built is not working. Maybe we need to change the big fundamentals. Now, on the left, it's tainted or tinged by leftist views. What leftist views? Things like, maybe we shouldn't have the police shooting people all the time. That's not economically left. It's what I would call, and it's kind of an interesting thing, because when I drew what you call the left in the US and the right, the extremes on either side of it are considered authoritarianism. So it's more a guiding principle in how much the government is willing to put weight towards that guiding principle. On the other side of that authoritarianism is the libertarian side. So in some sense, what you get out of the left and the right, and I know that there are some people who consider themselves libertarian and right, and very conservative. And I understand this different formulation of it, but where it's the government doesn't interfere in your life. Well, first of all, anarchy is a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum, and you get tyranny at a smaller scale when you have that. But outside of that. So, I mean, you cannot go full on libertarian. If you go all the way onto the libertarian side of things, you end up with little fiefdoms. Little fiefdoms of absolute power. And at what level are they? Well, you know, how far can they extend their power, and what can they gain control of? And one of the nice things about the larger state is that large operations are much, much harder, although the 20th century proves this wrong to some extent, but they're much, much harder to be absolutely authoritarian with. So you have a conflict, and this is built into our Constitution, essentially. You have a conflict between different layers of government. And I wish it went down lower than it does, but in some states it does, in others not so much. But I would say that the majority of the people, it appears, given that Trump could win the election, right, are in favor of something being transformational here. Trump won the last election, not the current one. Don't put me in that bunch. But now what we've seen is that particular flavor of transformation was so unpalatable. And why? Well, first of all, instead of putting an ideological transformational candidate on the ticket, and I don't think there was one on the right. I'm trying to think if there, Trump comes the closest probably. You had a bunch of establishment people on the right other than Trump in 2016. And so he was really the only choice for the conservative movement, which has more and more become turned to the deal that we have isn't working for us, right? Well, but he was not ideologically transformational. He suggested, he made a couple of points that he made us against them type things. And, you know, build the wall, right? That's the big one. Let's stop letting immigrants into the country. No nothingism, nativism, America first. All that was a great sales pitch that ended up covering, and I'm not saying, you know, he did his movement on trying to achieve those things. It's not like that wasn't there. On top of that, you had the anti-free trade impulses. Let's get what we're due, you know, and let's fucking have a trade war if we have to, you know. But beyond that, what you really saw was still, if anything, an even more unabashed and unashamed corporatism. That was the bargain that had to be made. So the establishment Republican Party got its corporatism buy-in, while throwing away free trade, any kind of compassion towards immigrants of any type, things that were believed, generally by the center as we have to have these things, they were willing to throw them out in exchange for corporatism. The transformational side was willing to take what I'd consider its nativist and very ugly rhetoric, and I'm not talking about the anti-free trade stuff because I'll get to that. I think that actually has its place on the left as well. And well, I know it does. And the price that they paid for that was this pro-corporatist policy. Let's cut the taxes on the wealthy. Let's cut the taxes on the corporations, which needed to be cut or needed to be. Honestly, all of taxes need to be reformed, but and he tried to do that, but then went away. Nope. Because the corporatists can't accept that. That was a step too far, right? There are things that you cannot transform if part of your alliance is that pro-corporatist thing. And he got a lot done for those corporatists. And he got a lot done for the social conservatives as well. There's no question. The court is 6 out of 9 are Catholic. 6 or yeah, I think it's 6 out of 9 Catholics. I think is it every Republican? Well, Kennedy was too. I'm trying to think. I think every Republican appointee is a pro-life Catholic, and you've got non-pro-life Catholics who've been who are willing to accept. Look, this is a government decision, not a religious one. I think 6 out of 9 pro-life Catholics, and it's really weird because the court is basically Catholic or Jewish. Those are the two choices for whatever reason. Aren't there good, solid legal thinkers who aren't associated with one of these two religions? Can't we have an atheist ever? But there are other religions too. I mean, only Catholics can be trusted to be pro-life. If they announce that they're pro-life and they're part of a special little cult in Catholicism, like Amy Rabbit Bryan or whatever. What do we got here? So yeah, the other. Let me check my battery's almost dead, and I got to keep an eye on it. So on the left, the transformational side is much more. Let's get minimum wage up. Now, minimum wage is problematic. There's the argument that for the right. There's the argument that it will it raises the cost of labor and therefore reduces the number of jobs available. There hasn't been any proof of that. If anything, the proof has been raising the minimum wage to a reasonable level causes inflation. I'll give you that. But it also ends up, in general, raising even corporate profits. But most importantly, what it does is it keeps the economy churning. It keeps the base economy and the labor force in place. I don't know about the corporate profits, actually. I think I may be wrong on that. In fact, I'm almost certain I am. But anyway, the corporatist wing can't accept that. And that's a significant part. That is the establishment Republican side of things, right? Now, the old alliance was the establishment corporatist side of the Republican Party and the social conservative side, and yeah, there's certainly some overlap. They drove things. Now you've got this new thing, though. The social conservatives became a big enough part that their interests didn't really align with the corporatism side, but they need to keep them. And you can't drain the swamp if you've got that corporatist side of things in place. And there's a corporatist side of the Democratic Party too. It's different. But, there's a reason when there's a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president, you didn't see Glass-Steagall go back into effect, right? People wanted it, but again, that's the transformational side. The part that wants us to go back to what worked, what made America great in the 40s and 50s, in the 50s and early 60s. The differences, the transformations that FDR and forward, including Republicans, were making to push towards a bigger government with more control and more attempts to make sure that there was a certain degree of fairness. To make sure that those who were already doing well did not continue to take advantage of their power and push it higher. And I mean, one of the simplest things was campaign finance, right? But that's a complicated issue. I don't think I've gotten to that in a video on its own, because it falls into a free speech thing. And it gets problematic because freedom of the press should allow you to be able to basically engage in political activism. If you try restricting that, you're starting to cause a problem. Now you can limit things on a very direct level, but it is very problematic. I have to say though, tax-exempt status for these slush funds of dark money, that's a step too far for my taste. But anyway, so the idea of that third party coalescing around the center, because the center is that corporatist, institutionalized, agree place that the government has been running from, I think that's impossible. There's no grassroots support for that. That can only be done by defections from the energy on the two parties. I think I need to swap batteries out. Let me do that. And sort of the magic of Trumpism is that he managed to pull that populist side of the party into agreement or into accepting for whatever he's giving, because it's got that nativist basis to it, into accepting a deal that allowed that corporatist wing to still exist. He never directly attacked the corporatist wing. He never directly took on that institutional side of the Republican Party. Well, no, he did. He won in every case, is the point. He managed to win, whereas the Democrat side failed when they took them on. Maybe in part because certain aspects of that institutional alignment were too valuable in terms of electability. So in particular there, things like, hey, personal loyalty and, running the government for your own profit is probably a bad idea. This is exactly the kind of stuff the founders didn't want to have happen. They didn't want you making corrupt deals to the degree that, hey, and another thing, how about you investigate my rival? Or worse, as we're seeing now. And you can see how far the acceptance of that very, very, not just hyper partisan, in the sense that, like, wow, I love America and all, but only if it's run by Republicans. It feels very much like what you read about in the early part of the 1800s, where you had this ridiculous level of behavior, where they would gut agencies and put in, put in their own patronage to just such a degree. And you still see that in a lot of levels of government. But sort of this anti-deep state movement. What the fuck's that? I mean, don't these sort of institutionalists that still exist, especially in the Senate, which completely shirked its responsibility to defend the institutions, don't they see that the deep state is what they stand for? Well, it's hard to say. I mean, if they're going to lose anyway, might as well be on the winning side. If they're going to lose all their ideals, might as well be on the winning side. And I feel like that's the kind of momentum you have. You have these people who are making these decisions of, well, maybe I can temper the anti-constitutional, anti-institutional, anti-republic wing of my Republican Party by cozying up. Maybe also, this is, pure conspiracy theory here, though. Maybe also enough key people, shit is known about them. You have to remember the David Pecker connection, his kill file, and Trump's access to that, all that kind of shit. It's kind of like, and not to mention, if there is some kind of deal with Putin, there may be plenty of information that could be leveraged that someone like Putin would, know they'd just be told go to hell by any other president. But now there's one in place who acts like a mob boss, So it could be a combination of many different things. Fear for being able to be reelected. Fear for where the party is going and wanting to be able to try to hang on and try to pull those reins a little bit. You see very few defections. Most of those that do kind of go mostly quietly. Your Senator Flake. that whole type just kind of faded away. They made their objections and they were unelectable, even for fairly minor objections. On the other side, in addition to trying to hold on and maybe pull some reins, you've got the, yeah, hell yeah, I'm for this policy type of people, or I'm mostly for it. So is that where Ted Cruz fits? I mean, he certainly fits in a lot of ways in terms of like anti-immigration. I feel like the worst thing about, the worst thing that Ted Cruz dealt with was the personal insults, but that Trump threw at him during the 2016 primaries. But I'm just trying to put a grasp on this. So, you know, he was always an outlier in the Senate because he wasn't really part of that institutional side of things. However, you would think that he would be in his, you know, holier than thou type way, and I would put Mike Lee in the same place here, honestly. You would think that these types would be like, you know, this is actually going precisely in the wrong. Here we're seeing precisely the kinds of things that the founders did not want. But again, you know, there may be internal bargains that these people have to make in terms of deluding themselves, you know, in that side of things. What about the left? Well, for the left, you have some really, really problematic issues too. You have things like defund the police. What's up with that? Well, the way it's sold on the media as, no, reallocate funds. That's what defund means. And it's true. If you say defund schools, you don't mean close all schools. You mean, hey, maybe we shouldn't be spending as much on certain school programs, etc. Defund the library. You don't mean close all the libraries. You mean cut the hours. So defund the police would be reduce the police under that link. But here's the problem. That term, defund the police, originated with people who wanted to abolish policing. And there's enough link to that it does tell, and it does sound exactly like, you know, the worst nightmares of, well, let's just fucking stop policing, you know, some of these areas and everything. And to some extent, it's true. I mean, you have like cities where the population feels like they're being occupied by an enemy force. Where they're being busted for what is community acceptable practices, right? What is just the nature of that area, and is not that dangerous, but because of things like the war on drugs, and because of certain biases, is being unfairly put as a burden on those areas. You don't see the same thing happening, you know, so yeah. Part of it is because the population density in the cities makes that kind of rigorous policing easier. The same thing applied in rural areas would be like pulling over cars and searching them just at random. You know, the kind of stuff that nobody in America would accept, but somehow it's more acceptable in the cities because the cities have always had more aggressive policing going on in them. But that's another issue. I mean, you didn't even have police in rural areas. In fact, you didn't have it in the city until late, until the gangs started becoming too big a problem, and you were having straight out firefights with the National Guard, well, with the militia and the gangs and stuff like that, and it was like, we need actual policing. Okay. What else with the left? Well, the left is also trying to engage that same part, well, they're trying to engage a part of the population, the majority of the population, that is not gaining from this economy and hasn't been gaining from it since, say, 1970. Let's call that the bad point. And during the 70s, everybody was losing. It was a bad recession, right? For the most part. And there were reasons for it. You know, whenever you wind down a war effort, boy, we're going to have one if we pull out of these wars. Uh, the attempt at the Great Society didn't really work, especially at the same time as a war effort. Whenever the government's taking too much debt, whenever there's too much regulation on industry, but it's worse than that. We had the oil crisis. Oil was king at that point. It's still pretty important, but not what it was. And the U.S. didn't have enough, and we were reliant on foreign energy production. We've gotten off of foreign energy production through various means, and some of them good, some of them maybe not so good. Some of them more disputable. Let's put it that way. Things like fracking. Do you really want your population to be getting flammable water? I don't know. Do you really want hundreds of earthquakes in Oklahoma every year? Again, there could be problems. There goes the liberal again, right? I want to be fair at analyzing, but it's harder to do so because we've seen the effect of this Trump seizure of power, or a seizure of the Republican Party, and welding together this compromise between a corporatist and a populist side. What would we see on the Democrat side? I don't know. I honestly don't know. There are certain things that there is a fair amount of agreement on. I don't think without the bully pulpit of the presidency, you look to, hey, where's the liberal side of things? And you look at the squad or whatever. It's always this small minority of people, just like it was in the Republican Party. You need something that's able to weld that together. And here's the thing. That institutional center on the Democrat side was too afraid to go along. Maybe because they saw what they saw in 2016. They saw what it caused. I know people who were looking and saying, long-term liberal Democrats, very liberal Democrats, who were looking and saying, well, if Sanders gets nominated, I may just vote for Trump. I can't vote for Sanders. I fear him more. This is the fear of the communist socialist side of things. I haven't seen anything on that side yet that frightens me. But again, before Trump got into office, my thought was, well, it's kind of neat to have a buffoon. So here was the thing. When I was faced with the election between him and Clinton, I was thinking about voting for Trump. The thing that turned me away from it was my liberalism, because he wedded himself to the conservative, to the religious conservative movement, to the point where I'm like, well, that's not good. We'll get Supreme Court justices who, although I might agree with their basic stance towards the law, and this is the craziest thing about me, because I actually am probably not an originalist, I am probably a textualist when it comes to the Constitution. But on the other hand, I'm willing to put aside my morals about the Republic in that sense. I feel like we've broken it so much already. And I consider this kind of shameful. I'm willing to put aside my morals as far as the Constitution in order to say, yeah, I really think people should have control of what is growing in their body. And there are other things that are not based on the pure legal interpretation. So here's the thing. Textualism would not allow the interstate commerce law to have been misused the way it is. Get rid of that fucker. Get rid of everything it implies. Get rid of the FDA. Get rid of, all this stuff. This stuff needs constitutional support to go here. So basically, you would have to destroy the entire federal government and rebuild it with what I would say are amendments to the Constitution or leave things to the states. And this is the problem I have with any attempt by originalists, by textualists especially, to try to deal with the court, is that we have ruined that position completely over basically since the Civil War, say. We have ruined it. And I kind of feel like we need to rebuild the government from the start up. Of course, that's ridiculous, but it does in terms of being able to affect that. There's been too many corrupt compromises, too many bargains, too many acceptances, and the choice for me is, do I accept that I'm willing to get rid of I'm willing to put aside my feeling that there should be an ideological purity to the law and that the Constitution should really be faithfully adhered to as to the letter that it's written in, or that boat has sailed so long ago that I have to support things that I just don't agree with at all. It's a matter of the ends end up justifying the means solely because the means have been wrecked already. There is nothing left of the Constitution, in my view, or very little. Very, very little. Once you start allowing for some of the stuff that the federal government has gotten its little fingers into, I can't cope with it. It's like, okay, well, I would overturn everything, damn near. And I would also read things differently. Like I say, I see myself as a textualist, but I read the Second Amendment as that means that guns are controlled by the communities. If you're in a town that has decided we're not going to limit your gun carrying, gun ownership, any of that at all, I'm okay with that. If you're in a town that says you can't carry a gun, you can't carry a gun. And it's that simple. The well-regulated militia, to me, that's the police force. There were not police forces at that point in time in most places. Or, if need be, a local militia or whatever. These things were handled, you weren't allowed to carry a gun around New York City at that point. It was accepted that it was wrong. But the militia could break out their guns when there was serious problem, and they would carry them out, under their regulations. Anyway, that's the problem I have with the court side of things. But I've lost my train, as I so often do. I'm trying to figure out so I guess the big problem that I have with trying to look at what the liberals would be like is I can paint this rosy picture, I know that's not the case. I also don't believe that it would be as bad a situation as we've gotten into in the last few years. I don't think it would be as corrupt. I don't think... So, take a look at the personalities of an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders and compare it to Donald Trump. Donald Trump has made his life's business defrauding people, okay? He just has. He's made his life business skirting the law, trying to bend things, hiring the best lawyers to threaten people. This is not the same kind of person, right? So you're not going to see that kind of corruption, that kind of transactional relationship to get what he wants, right? Uh-oh, I'm out of battery again. You're also not going to see the same kind of vile and divisive language that has caused us so much hurt in this country. You're probably not going to see the kind of mismanagement. It's hard to tell, you know. I would struggle to say that, you know, Bernie Sanders has the kind of experience in managing things to necessarily show him as the kind of person you'd want running the government. I would probably say the same about most senators. Elizabeth Warren, I mean, she certainly doesn't have the experience. She might have a better grasp on the theory, but in either case, they're going to rely on the institutionalism to do things, and that might not work so well. We've had problems with people who have not been well suited to running things. But I would say, you know, for all Trump being this businessman who ran a corporation, you know, well, a family company / crime family, criminal enterprises, and some of them are, you know, I mean, he has defrauded the public officially. Some of them are provably so. Others are probably so. It sure seems a lot better to accidentally hire an incompetent than to deliberately hire a criminal, right? I mean, it just does. However, those may not be your best choices in terms of they've got no provable record of running anything. On the other hand, people with a provable record of running things might be dangerous choices. So, I mean, think about a Rex Tillerson in charge of government. Is that what you really want? Maybe. You know, maybe if you want more drilling. If you want them to cut costs by cutting people out of the government and reducing its services. Because I'm sure he cut costs in his corporation. That's the way we do things. That's how we inflate value of the stocks, if not value of the corporation itself. And that is many other videos. So yeah, I mean, it's hard without the example in front of you to really say what would happen if you had this a liberal come in. Could just be no, you know. I mean, first of all, would a Senate with a Joe Manchin, would even a Chuck Schumer be happy with trying to push things? You know, he'd probably take cover from a Joe Manchin. But here's the point: would that Senate be willing to push things so that they were willing to say just override get rid of the filibuster cloture rules and stuff like that? And by giving that cover, then you could have the little political games that are played to prevent anything from getting done, but allow people to vote the way they look like they want to be voting. And that's what you had with the cancel Obamacare, and you have the same kind of shit on the left, where people have cover that they can make votes that don't matter. You know, it's a problem. It's a real problem. Combination of party control and positions that, you know, the party doesn't want to have actually implemented. So I think there's a good chance that you would have a completely ineffectual presidency in such a case. If it swept in a wave of, you know, socialist-leaning Democrats, obviously that's something different. But let's say that's not going to happen. You know, I don't see that revolution. We don't see any signs of it. Yes, we see signs that the Democratic Party may be moving more to the left, but we don't see signs of that sweeping the country to the extent that you'd just be able to override anything. So get rid of that fear. So then the fear is, would there be a bargain between the corporatists and what is essentially, from what I can see, anti-corporatists? The only place they agree, if they do, is on the institutions of the U.S. You know, the idea that the government has experts, that has people with experience who can, if selected well, chosen well, run well, can do good things. That's the only thing. But those two wings are just, you know, completely against each other. And you'd have to come up with a slogan. And what could you come up with? Well, maybe defund the police would have worked. You know, maybe that's like build the wall. That would have been the kind of thing. Some kind of nativist stupidity that isn't going to change and isn't going to fix. It's not going to be the transformation that's needed. The truth of the matter is, the transformation that's needed by both the poor conservative areas and the poor urban liberal areas is the same thing, I think. It's a government which pays attention to the needs of its people and makes sure that they receive their fair share. In broad terms. But how do they get their fair share? Well, that's the question. And how much are you taken in by the corporatist side that says cut taxes on the wealthy, encourage, give business big handouts, etc. Well, I'll tell you, that conservative side of the transformational folk hated it. They hated it. But they were brought to different types of, they were fired up on different things. They were fired up on, the government can't have so much debt. Okay, cut the government debt. That happened during the Clinton years. How much did that help you? There are some clear things. You want to cut the debt? Stop giving the huge tax breaks. Sure. Government's been cut to the fucking bone already in a lot of ways. Could be cut more. You could get rid of huge sections. Like I said, interstate commerce has been totally misused to allow the federal government to have huge amounts of things. But there are some programs you could get rid of. There are definitely programs you can get rid of. You don't want to get rid of the regulatory programs, though. Regulation is important. That's what keeps us on the financial side from slipping into financial calamities like the Great Recession. Cut the military to the bone. I mean, way back. This is something you'll see, at least in rhetoric, both Trump and Sanders kind of want it. Let's get out of the wars. They're costing us too much. Yeah, let's cut the military too. We spend way too much on certain things. Can we afford that? If we are not a world power anymore, if we're not the world policeman, yeah. We spend way more than we should. Let's cut it to that 2% of the GDP or whatever we want the rest of NATO to do. How about that? Wouldn't that be fair? Okay, let's just cut it in half. That would be that would keep us well above, I believe. But one of the biggest problems is the programs that generally get the most ire are things that are not a big part of the budget. The biggest part of the budget, quite frankly, is stuff that the government has committed to its people already, and that is hard to cut. Things like Social Security, and the debt. The fact that we service our debt. I mean, we could just default, but but that would destroy the economy. That would destroy it. But would it destroy it more than the failure to regulate did? I'm not sure. It would wipe out wealth. But wiping out wealth might be a good thing. Unfortunately, the people who own the government, the institutionalists who have owned it all along, can't accept such radical solutions. And they're not going to happen. They're not going to happen. Not without a tremendous revolution. And we're not seeing that kind of revolution. What we're seeing instead is sort of a shell game over on the right that worked, and, the calls to revolution on the left that didn't. And it's funny, because our two parties overlap these two really very basic needs. And then, so they both have their corporatist wing, and they both have their transformational side, which wants to do something that will work for the people one way or another. I'm going to have to cut this here because battery is dead and we're not going to get anywhere.